She had read it 4 times. Not because it was complicated. The Korean legal language had been translated cleanly into English on the facing page, the way documents written to take something from you always are. Simple sentences. Short paragraphs. A structure designed to feel reasonable until you looked up from it and understood what you had agreed to. Joan Brown sat in the waiting room of Hanul Match Consultancy on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, Seoul, and read the contract a 5th time. Clause 1. The party of the first part, her, agreed to enter into a legal marriage with the party of the second part, a Korean national to be identified upon finalization, for a minimum period of 2 years. Clause 4. In exchange, the sum of $60,000 would be paid in 2 installments, 30 on the signing of the marriage certificate, 30 at the 12-month mark, contingent on the marriage remaining legally intact. Clause 7. The party of the first part agreed to reside in the party of the second part's primary residence in Seoul for the duration of the contract. She was 34 years old. Black. American. 3 years in Seoul on a teaching contract that had started as adventure and become, through a series of events she could not have predicted, the only life her children knew. Those children were Philip, 8, Henrietta, 6, and baby Jane, 18 months, who still reached for her in the night and patted her face with both hands to make sure she was real. She had $17 in her American account, 40,000 Korean won in her Korean won, enough for this week's groceries. Not enough for the 6 weeks of overdue rent on the apartment in Mapogu. Not enough for Philip's school fees. Not nearly enough for any version of next month. She had not told her children, not Mrs. Kim downstairs, who watched the children after school and brought doenjang jjigae on Sundays and had become, over 3 years, the closest thing to family they had in the city. Not her mother back in Atlanta, who had her own impossible weight. She had told no one. Hey family! Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories. If you have ever made a decision that terrified you because the alternative was worse, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and tell me what time this video got to you. Your supports keep this stories alive. And don't forget to like, share and hit the subscribe button because this story is about what happens after the terrifying decision. Joan had found the agency through a woman in her expat network, a whispered fact passed woman to woman the way desperate information travels. There is a place. Korean men with inheritance clauses, business requirements, family pressure. They need a wife on paper. It is not romantic. It is a transaction. A transaction. She could work with a transaction. She had met Ms. O, the consultant, crisp blazer, perfect English, the tone of someone explaining a lease agreement. Ms. O had placed the contract on the table and said, we have a match. Vetted. Respectful. Full domestic non-interference. Your children are accommodated. Joan had taken the contract home. Read it for 3 days. Watched Philip divide their last bag of rice into careful portions with the quiet focus of an 8-year-old who had decided someone needed to manage the situation, and on the 4th day she had picked up her pen. She signed it. Now she sat in the waiting room in her good dress, the navy one, kept for interviews and important things, holding her copy of the contract and waiting to meet the man she had agreed to marry. Ms. O appeared. Mr. Beck is ready for you. Joan stood, straightened her dress, made her face do the thing, composed, direct, nothing visible that she hadn't put there intentionally. She walked through the door. The man at the window had his back to her, looking out at the Han River in the distance, Gangnam's towers catching the late afternoon light. He turned when she entered and she saw his face, sharp features, dark eyes, a suit worn like someone who had stopped noticing what he was wearing long ago. And something else. She saw it immediately, because she was good at reading people who tried not to be read. He was as afraid as she was. Different shape of fear. Different road to this room. But the same structure underneath. Ms. Brown, he said. His English was formal, precise. My name is Beck Seo-jun. I know, she said. I read the brief. I read yours, he said. A silence. Two people who had arrived at the same table by entirely different roads, holding the same document, about to make the same irreversible decision. "Shall we sit?" he said. "Yes," she said. And they sat down across from each other, and the rest of their lives began. His father's name was Baek Sung-il. He had built Baek Construction from one small road contract in Incheon in 1988, 30 years of relentless work, starting from nothing, growing into an organization that employed 9,000 people across South Korea. He had been a man who showed love through structure rather than softness, and whose death 14 months ago had left Seo-jun with a company, a grief he had no language for, and a clause. The clause was in the will. It stated that controlling ownership of Baek Construction would transfer to Seo-jun on his 42nd birthday, 4 months away, provided he was legally married at that date. If not, the shares passed to a board trust managed by his father's former partners who would, Seo-jun knew with certainty, strip the company for profit and leave 9,000 people with nothing. His father had not inserted the clause to be cruel. He had inserted it because he knew his son. He knew that Seo-jun, left alone, would keep choosing work over life indefinitely. Had watched him do it for 12 years since his last serious relationship ended. Had watched him fill every room of his existence with strategy and structure and carefully managed distance and call it enough. He had decided to create a structural incentive. Seo-jun had tried the orthodox route. He had attended the introductions his mother arranged, Sogeeting, careful and traditional. He had been present and attentive and on 3 occasions had thought, perhaps this is it. Each time, something pulled back. The guard he had built was efficient. It did not have an obvious door. And now 4 months remained. He had come to Hanul with the cold logic of an engineer solving a load-bearing problem. Ms. O had brought him 3 profiles. Joan Brown's was the third. He had read it twice. Black American. 3 years in Seoul. 3 children. Former English teacher. Currently facing significant financial hardship. The consultancy's reference note said, direct, highly capable, unlikely to be managed. That last phrase was why he chose her file. He did not need to be managed. He needed someone who would be honest with him. In his experience, those were not the same thing and not everyone could provide the second. Now she sat across from him reading the supplementary clauses with the focused attention of someone who intended to understand every word. She looked up. The residence requirement. Your apartment. Yongsan-gu, he said. Noksapyeong Station. My children's school is in Mapo-gu. Line 6 from Noksapyeong. 1 transfer at Gongdeek. Approximately 50 minutes with the children. She looked at him. He had researched this before she arrived. She filed it. Your family, she said. Beyond the inheritance clause. Will anyone make my children's lives difficult? He gave her the honest answer. His mother was traditional and currently opposed to the arrangement on the grounds she had stated plainly to him. A Black American wife was not what she had pictured for her son. She had said this directly, which he respected even while disagreeing with it. My mother will be distant initially, he said. She is not irrational. Evidence changes her. Joan looked at him for the gap between what was said and what was true. She found none. 1 condition, she said. Name it. In that apartment in private, my children are not performing anything for anyone. They speak how they speak. They eat what they eat. They are exactly who they are. The arrangement is for outside. Inside that door, they are people. He held her gaze without flinching. Agreed. Without reservation. She looked at him one more moment. Then she turned to the contract and annealed the final page. He watched her do it and thought, my father put a clause in his will because he knew I would never choose this on my own. He thought, perhaps my father knew me better than I thought. The apartment was on the 15th floor in Yongsan-gu, with Namsan Tower visible from the living room window, lit against the Seoul night like something permanent. It was large, modern, the kind of space that architectural magazines photograph and that real people sometimes forget to make feel lived in. Seo-jun had made an attempt. Not a dramatic one, not hired stylists and decorative props. Small things. A second set of hooks by the front door at child height, which could only have been installed in the last week. A low table in what was now Philip and Henrietta's room, the right height for homework. A small basket in the bathroom, children's shampoo, a soft face cloth, a cup with cartoon bears on it for Jane's bedtime routine. He had read the brief thoroughly. And then he had done something with it. Joan stood in the hallway and noted all of this and said none of it. Mrs. Kim had come to help with the move. She had declared this non-negotiable in the way of Korean women of a certain age and authority for whom involvement in a family matter is not an offer but a fact. She moved through Seo-jun's kitchen opening cabinets with the candor of someone running a formal inspection. No gochujang, she announced. No doenjang. No sesame oil. She turned to face the room. How does a Korean man have no fermented paste? This is a problem. Mrs. Kim, Joan said. I am reporting, Mrs. Kim said. She looked at Seo-jun. Do you cook? Ramen, he said. Mrs. Kim turned to Joan with the expression of a woman recording a significant deficiency in the official record. Philip had gone directly to the bookcase, floor to ceiling, dense, mostly Korean titles with a section of English books. He stood before it with his hands behind his back. Not touching, just looking, with a reverence he reserved for serious collections. Henrietta was in the hallway examining a large framed photograph. A bridge, wide, over water catching the light at a particular angle. Who built that? She asked. My father, Seo-jun said. His first major project. The Incheon Bridge extension. Henrietta looked at the photograph, then at Seo-jun, then back at the photograph. She was filing it. Jane, on Joan's hip, pointed at Namsan Tower outside the window. Nah, she said. Her word for things that mattered. That's Namsan Tower, Joan told her. Nah, Jane confirmed. Close enough. Seo-jun looked at this family filling his apartment, differently from how one person fills a space, with noise and redirected attention and children orbiting their mother like small planets, and felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically. The way a latch turns on a window that has been closed a long time. That night, after Mrs. Kim had gone and the children were in bed and the apartment was quiet, Joan sat at the kitchen table with barley tea. She had found the jar in the cabinet, had made it herself without asking, because 3 years in Seoul meant she knew what was in a Korean kitchen even if the Korean man in this one had forgotten to use it. Seo-jun appeared. Changed out of his suit. He looked more like a person in a gray sweater. May I? He said at the chair across from her. Yes. He sat. He did not speak immediately. He looked at his hands and then at her with the expression of a man who had prepared remarks and decided they were insufficient. The hooks by the door, she said. He paused. You had them installed before we arrived, she said. The children needed somewhere for their bags, he said. As if this were simply a gap that had needed filling. You read the brief that carefully, she said. I read it the way I read structural specifications, he said. The details are where the integrity is. She looked at him. That is either a very engineering thing to say or a very kind one. Perhaps both, he said. They sat in the kitchen with their barley tea and the Seoul night outside. Namsan lit in the distance, the Han River somewhere beyond it, the city doing what Seoul does at 11 p.m., which is everything, all at once, without apology. I need to tell you something, Joan said. So it isn't a surprise. Tell me. My children notice everything. Philip will have a complete assessment of you by the end of the week. He won't tell you directly, He'll tell me, and I'll decide what to pass on. Henrietta will ask you questions that have no comfortable answers, and she will not accept a deflection. She paused. And Jane will either decide you are safe or she won't. She has never been wrong. He was quiet. How long did it take Mrs. Kim? For days, Joan said. Jane sat in her lap on day 5. I see, he said. And I have 4 months before my birthday. You have as long as it takes, Joan said. Simply. I'm not running a deadline on my daughter's instincts. He looked at her. This woman who had come to sign a contract and was already, in the first evening, making the terms more honest than any document could. Understood, he said. Outside, Seoul breathed its night breath. Inside the apartment, 3 children slept in rooms that were new to them, in a city that was not, in a life that was being built from pieces that didn't yet know their own shape. Philip Brown had a system. It had started when he was 5, the year his father left. Quietly, the way water recedes, there one morning and then a phone call and then a version of life that had only one constant. His mother. He had decided at 5 that the correct response was, pay attention. Notice what adults did when they thought no one was watching. That version was always the accurate one. He had been running his system on Baek Seo-jun for 9 days. Day 1. Seo-jun had given Philip the choice of any shelf in the bookcase for his own books. Not a token corner. Any shelf. Philip had chosen the 3rd from the top, which required the step-stool. Seo-jun moved the step-stool beside the bookcase without being asked or making anything of it. Day 4. Philip came to the kitchen at 6 a.m. and found Seo-jun at the window with barley tea, looking at the city. Seo-jun had not turned or adjusted his expression. He had said, in a normal voice, "Good morning. Tea is made," and returned to the window. He had not performed welcome. He had simply included Philip the way you include someone whose presence is natural. Day 7. Seo-jun sat at the table while Henrietta explained her theory that the Han River had a color that changed depending on what the sky was thinking. He did not give her the adult smile and nod. He looked at the river from the window for a moment and then said, I think you might be right. At 6 a.m. it is completely different from noon. Henrietta grabbed her notebook. Day 9. Seo-jun was in the kitchen making breakfast. Not ramen. Eggs. Carefully, consulting his phone between steps. Philip sat at the counter and watched. You're following a recipe, Philip said. Yes, Seo-jun said. For eggs. I wanted to make them correctly. No embarrassment. Another data point. People who were not embarrassed about not knowing things but simply went and found out were more trustworthy than people who pretended. What kind? Philip asked. Gyron Mari. Rolled omelette. Your mother said Jane likes eggs in a shape she can hold. Philip filed this. Seo-jun had not made special eggs for Philip or Henrietta or himself. He had identified a specific need of the youngest member of the family and learned a technique to meet it. Can I ask you something? Philip said. Yes. Why did your father put that clause in the will? Seo-jun turned from the pan, gave Philip his full attention. Because he knew me, he said. He knew that without a reason I couldn't argue with, I would spend my whole life working and tell myself it was enough. Was it enough? Philip asked. A pause. No, Seo-jun said. But I was very good at pretending otherwise. Philip was quiet. My mom does that sometimes, he said. For us. So we don't worry. But I can tell. I know, Seo-jun said. I can tell too. Philip looked at him. 9 days of data had produced a finding. I'm going to tell you the concerns, Philip said. Because I think you're worth telling. Seo-jun turned off the stove. Full attention. You hold yourself very still around my mom, Philip said. Like you're waiting for permission to be a real person in the room with her. That won't work. My mom doesn't give permission, she responds to honesty. He folded his hands on the counter. And you look at her when she's not watching. I've seen you do it. Which means you feel something you haven't said yet. You should say it before it gets complicated. The kitchen was completely quiet except for Seoul outside the window. Seo-jun stood with a perfectly rolled gyron mari in the pan and looked at this 8-year-old who had just delivered a more accurate diagnosis of his interior life than anyone had managed in years. You are, he said carefully, extremely precise. My mom says I get it from her mother, Philip said. I never met her. But she must have been something. I think so too, Seo-jun said. Philip slid off the stool. I'm going to wake Henrietta. She takes a long time. At the door, he turned back. The eggs look good. Thank you. Tell my mom that too, Philip said. That things look good. She doesn't hear it enough. He disappeared down the hall. Seo-jun stood in the kitchen with the morning light coming off the Han River in the distance and thought about what it meant to be seen by a child who had decided you were worth telling the truth to. He thought, I have been holding myself still. He thought, that needs to stop. She was not looking for anything. She was cleaning on a Sunday, hands busy while her mind processed the accumulation of the past month. Seo-jun was visiting his mother in Songbuk-dong. The children were with Mrs. Kim downstairs, who had continued her involvement with the implication that Yongsan-gu was now simply an extension of her jurisdiction. The study door was open, drifted ajar on its hinges, the way of a door not fully latched. She stood at the doorway and looked in without stepping inside. Books, dense and technical. Engineering certificates on the wall. A large photograph of the Incheon Bridge, the same one Henrietta had been studying, taken at the angle of someone who felt something for it rather than merely documenting it. Beside it, a photograph of a man in a hard hat beside a younger Seo-jun, both looking at something off-camera. Seo-jun was laughing. Open, unguarded, entirely unmanaged. A version of him she had not seen at the table or in the kitchen or at any point in the past month. His father. Baek Sung-il. She understood immediately. On the desk, a handwritten letter, in Korean, framed. The paper had been folded and unfolded many times. She could not read it, but she understood what it was. A letter read so often it had worn itself into the hands of the person who kept returning to it. She stood in the doorway and thought about a father who had written a clause into a will not from cruelty but from knowledge, who had understood that his son would engineer around every soft thing in his life and keep calling it strength, who had decided to build a structure his son couldn't dismantle. She pulled the door gently back and stood in the hallway. She had signed a contract. She had known what she was signing. She had spent 4 weeks watching it become something she did not have clean language for, and she was a woman who preferred clean language. She was practical. She did not traffic in feelings that outpaced their evidence. But the evidence was accumulating in ways that were no longer manageable as coincidence. He had installed hooks at child height before they arrived. He had learned to make gyron mari from a video because Jane liked eggs she could hold. He had sat with Henrietta's theory about the Han River color as if it were a proposal worth taking seriously. He looked at Joan when she wasn't watching. Philip had confirmed this. She had confirmed it herself from the corner of her own eye, more than once. She went to the kitchen and made tea and sat with the honest version of what she was feeling until she had looked at it completely. Then she went back to cleaning. When Seo-jun came home that evening, she was at the kitchen table with a book, and he said, "How was the afternoon?" And she said, "Good. Quiet." And she made them both tea without being asked, the way she had started doing without noticing she had started. He sat across from her. Neither of them mentioned the study door, but she had left it more open than she found it. And he noticed. Month 2 brought the family dinner. Seo Jun explained it with the efficiency of a man describing a structural test. His father's former partners, Chairman Oh and Director Lim, between them 60 years in Korean construction, had requested a dinner. They wanted to see the wife. They were evaluating, without saying so, whether the inheritance transfer should be contested. They will be polite, Seo Jun said. But they will ask questions designed to find inconsistency. Things only a real couple would know. What makes answers consistent? Joan asked. Not the facts, he said. The texture. The specificity. The way you refer to each other. Joan had made tea, she did this now, automatically, and set his mug in front of him. Then we don't rehearse, she said. We have 4 weeks of real. We know each other. He looked at his tea. Do we? She looked at him. You take barley tea without sugar. For sips, and you set the mug on the left side of whatever you're working on. You check the door when you come home before you take your coat off. You asked Philip about his Korean practice worksheet the day before his test without being told the test date, because you had looked at the school calendar on the fridge. She paused. Should I continue? He was quiet. I know you, she said. And you know me. That is what we tell them. The dinner was at a private restaurant in Yeonggu, traditional, the kind of place where the banchan arrived in the order it always had for generations, and the lighting was designed for serious conversation. Chairman Oh was silver-haired, courteous, precise. Director Lim was quieter, with the patience of a man who had spent his life reading rooms. They asked how the couple met. Seo Jun said, through a mutual contact, at a point of transition for both. Joan said, he was not what I expected, which is the beginning of most things worth having. Chairman Oh smiled. The texture was right. Director Lim asked Joan about her life in Seoul. She told him, the teaching, the 3 years, the Mapogu neighborhood, the Line 6 subway she could navigate blindfolded, the specific banchan stall in Mangwon Market that Mrs. Kim called the only acceptable kimchi in the district. She said it without performance because none of it required performance. It was simply her life. You're Korean, Director Lim said. How much do you have? Enough to understand about 70% of what people say to me, Joan said. And to know the 30% I miss is usually the most interesting part. Director Lim reassessed her. Not warmth, recalibration. What do you miss most about America? Chairman Oh asked. Joan considered this honestly. My grandmother's church in Atlanta. The choir specifically. I have not found anything in Seoul that sounds like a Black Baptist choir on a Sunday morning, and I have genuinely looked. She paused. Everything else I need is here. She said the last sentence simply. Her eyes went briefly to Seo Jun beside her. Not a performance, just a fact, and back to Chairman Oh. Director Lim set down his chopsticks. Mr. Beck, he said. Your father would have liked her. A beat. Yes, Seo Jun said quietly. He would have. In the car afterward, Joan said, Director Lim decided in the first 20 minutes. He was watching whether you looked at me when you thought no one was paying attention. Seo Jun glanced at her. And you did, she said. Twice. Both times when I was talking to Chairman Oh. He was quiet. Was that a problem? He said. No, she said. It was the answer to his question. Seoul moved around them. The Han River Bridge lit up on their left, Namsan Tower in the distance, the city doing what it does at night, which is everything at once, without apology. Neither of them spoke again until they were home. And when they stepped inside and saw the children's shoes in the hallway in the pattern they always left them, Philip's neatly paired, Henrietta's pointed in opposite directions, Jane's tiny one sideways, both of them stood there for a moment, looking at the shoes. The apartment looked, from the doorway, entirely like a place where people lived who meant it. Jane Brown was 18 months old and operated on the assumption that everything was available for investigation. Every surface, every object, every person. Her method was direct. She walked toward things, reached for them, understood them through contact, and reported her findings in syllables and pointed fingers that the people around her had learned to interpret. She had been investigating Beck Seo-jun for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks she had touched his face twice, taken his pen on 4 occasions, sat on his foot during a phone call and refused to move for its duration, and eaten half his dinner on a Tuesday when he made the error of leaving his chopsticks unattended. Each time, Seo-jun had responded with the patient attention of someone who had decided the correct approach to Jane was simply to be whatever he was and let her reach her own conclusions. He did not perform gentleness. He was gentle. Joan had noticed this distinction early, and it mattered to her more than she said to anyone. The decision happened on a Thursday evening. Seo-jun was at the kitchen table after dinner, working through documents. Joan was in the next room helping Philip with a Korean language worksheet. Philip had decided, with the practicality of a child living in Seoul, that he needed better Korean, and had started a program of study he managed himself. Jane had been on the kitchen floor. She stood up, walked to Seo-jun's chair, stood beside it, and waited. He looked down. She raised both arms. He looked at her. She looked at him. The apartment was quiet except for Philip's Korean pronunciation from the next room and Seoul traffic far below. He set his pen down, picked her up, settled her on his knee, facing the documents. She patted the paper twice with the authority of an editor reviewing a draft. Then she leaned back against his chest, put her thumb in her mouth, and went still. He had a deadline. He had a document that needed to be finished before 8 a.m. He sat there with Jane against his chest and did not move, and after 5 minutes she was asleep in the complete, sudden, unreserved way of toddlers. Joan came to the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. Seo-jun at the table, documents in front of him, Jane asleep against his chest, his right hand resting on her back, moving in the slow, involuntary rhythm of someone who has been soothing a child and hasn't stopped. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. They looked at each other across the kitchen for a long moment. Joan pressed her lips together briefly. She was not going to cry in the kitchen on a Thursday. She had a rule. "I'll take her," she said quietly. "She's asleep," he said. "I can finish around her. You have a deadline. 40 minutes. I can work with one hand." Joan looked at them, this man she had agreed to marry on paper, her daughter asleep against him as if this were simply where she had always been, and the thing she had been filing under not yet ready to name asked very directly to be named. She did not name it. "Not tonight. Call me when she wakes," she said. "I will." She went back to Philip and the Korean worksheets and the ordinary business of the evening, and she breathed through the feeling of something shifting in her chest the way she breathed through things too large for immediate processing. Philip looked up from his worksheet. "Read her face." "Jane chose him," he said. "Yes," Joan said. Philip nodded. Returned to his pronunciation. In the kitchen, Seo-jun finished his document one-handed in 43 minutes. He sent it at 7:58. He did not move Jane until she woke at 9:15, which she did by sitting up, looking at him, patting his face twice, and saying, "Nah," which meant Nam San Tower, and hello, and you again, and covered the situation entirely. Month 4. Seo-jun's birthday was in 3 weeks. The shares would transfer. The legal purpose of the contract would be satisfied. Ms. O called on a Tuesday, efficiently, professionally. She reminded them of the 12-month review clause, the continuation options, the exit procedures available at the 6-month point. Seo-jun said, "I'll discuss it with my wife." He used the word without thinking, not contractually, just the word. He sat with this after he hung up. He went to find Joan. She was in the kitchen helping Henrietta with a school project, a diagram of Seoul's Han River districts, which Henrietta was rendering with artistic commitment that was extending the timeline significantly. Philip was at the table doing Korean reading practice. Jane was on the floor narrating her own block construction. Mine. This one. Here. Mine. This was, Seo-jun had understood over 4 months, the specific music of this family. Overlapping, layered, each voice distinct but producing something together that was its own thing. He stood at the kitchen doorway. Joan looked up. She read his face. She had learned to do this, the way you learn to read a city, through repeated contact, and said nothing but told him with her eyes, after the children are in bed. They had developed this language without naming it. That fact was itself a kind of answer. After the children were in bed, they sat at the kitchen table. Ms. O called, he said. I know. She called me also. She mentioned the 6-month exit option. Yes. Do you want to use it? She looked at him. He was not asking the question he appeared to be asking, and they both knew it. Do you? She said. He was quiet. No, he said. I don't want to use any exit option. At any point. He said it plainly, without the management he had been dismantling over the past months. I want to tell you something clearly. Say it clearly, she said. This was supposed to be administrative, he said. 2 people who needed something from the same arrangement. That is what it was on the day we signed. But it is not what it has been for some time. And I have not said that because I was afraid of what it meant for you, that you might feel pressured by the situation. That the contract itself creates an obligation that makes it difficult to know what you actually want, independent of what is required. He looked at her steadily. So I need you to know, if you want to leave, now, at 6 months ever, I will honor it entirely. I will make sure you and the children are fully supported regardless of what you decide. A pause. But I am asking you honestly what you want, not what the contract says, what you want. The Han River was somewhere beyond the window in the dark. Namsan Tower lit in the distance. Joan looked at this man, careful, honest, slightly afraid in a way he was refusing to hide, and thought about what Mrs. Kim had said 3 weeks ago over Sunday jjigae, when the children were in the next room and the 2 women were briefly alone. You look at him the way you look at something you're trying to find a reason not to keep. She had not answered Mrs. Kim that evening. I want to ask you something first, she said. Ask. When your birthday passes and the shares transfer, when the legal reason for this arrangement is finished, who are you without it? He understood the precision of it. I am a man who woke up in a chair at 4 a.m. because a child he has no obligation to needed someone to hold her hand, he said. I am a man who has eaten Sunday breakfast at a table that is too loud and not wanted to be anywhere else. He held her gaze. The contract was the door. You and your children are the reason I walked through it and don't want to walk back. She was quiet. Philip said you were worth telling the concerns to, she said finally. I know, Seo-jun said. He told me. He doesn't say that about many people. I know that too. She looked at the kitchen that had become hers, the barley tea jar she had moved to the front of the cabinet, the children's drawings on the refrigerator, the small American flag pin Henrietta had stuck to the corner of the Han River map on the wall. I don't want the exit option, she said. He looked at her. I want to stay, she said. Not because of the contract. In spite of it. She held his gaze. But I need you to understand something. I will not tell you I love you tonight because I do not perform feelings I haven't fully arrived at yet. But I am here. Fully. And I intend to find out. That is everything I am asking for, he said. And the contract, in a folder in his study, became the least important document in the apartment. It had served its purpose. Everything after this was their own. The wall had been Henrietta's project since week 1. She had asked through the correct channel, her mother, on day 3, The hallway wall. The long one. Can I use it? Seo-jun had said yes without hesitation, and had added, the one in her room too, if she wanted. Henrietta had received this with the gravity of an artist given a commission. She had planned, sketched, asked questions. She asked Seo-jun what the most important thing his father had built was. He said, the Incheon Bridge extension. She had asked him to describe it, and he had brought up photographs on his laptop, and she had studied them for 20 minutes in focused silence, memorizing rather than simply looking. She asked Joan, what is the most beautiful thing you have ever been part of? Joan had thought and said, Sunday mornings in Atlanta. Walking to my grandmother's church, the whole block smelling like cooking before the doors even opened, the choir coming out through the walls. Henrietta had written this down. She asked Philip. He said, the first time I read a full sentence in Korean without stopping. She had written this down too. She asked Jane. Jane said, Na, which Henrietta incorporated as a star, because Na had come to mean Namsan, and Namsan had come to mean home. She asked Mrs. Kim what the wall should feel like. Mrs. Kim thought for a long time and then said, in Korean first and English second for certainty, home. But not the building. The people inside it. On a Saturday in month 5, Henrietta announced the wall was finished. They gathered in the hallway. Joan, Seo-jun, Philip, Mrs. Kim who had come upstairs specifically, and Jane on Seo-jun's shoulders, her established position, one hand anchored in his hair. The wall was extraordinary. At the center, the Incheon Bridge, in Henrietta's wide, confident strokes, spanning a river that caught the light in the specific way she had studied from the window for 5 months. Recognizably the bridge. And also more than the bridge, the idea of the thing a bridge is before it is built. Crossing it. Figures. Specific. Individual. A tall one with a book, mid-stride. A small round one with both arms out, mid-declaration. A woman in a good dress, straight-backed, looking forward. A taller figure beside her, close but not quite touching, the distance of 2 people who are still learning the right proximity. On one end of the bridge, a small American flag. On the other end, a small Korean flag, their edges almost touching in the middle. Above the bridge, stars, specifically, the constellation visible from Seoul on clear nights, plotted accurately, with one extra star above the others labeled in careful letters, N.A. At the bottom of the wall, in the largest letters, in the warm red of Atlanta morning light and the deep blue of Han River, one word in English and one in Korean, side by side. Home. Nobody spoke. Mrs. Kim made a sound that was not quite a word. Philip looked at it with the expression he reserved for correct things. Jane, on Seo-jun's shoulders, pointed at the star labeled N.A. Nah, she said, with complete authority. That one is yours, Henrietta told her. Nah, Jane confirmed. Joan pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. Her eyes were bright in a way she was not managing. Seo-jun looked at the wall. At his father's bridge rendered by a 6-year-old who had studied the photographs in 20 minutes of silence and produced this. At the 2 flags almost touching. At the figures crossing together. He looked at Henrietta, who was looking back at him with the frank gaze of an artist waiting for a response. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, he said. I know, Henrietta said. I worked very hard on it. The bridge, he said. You got the angle exactly right. I looked at it until I understood it, she said. She went to the lower right corner, the section she had left deliberately bare, and painted one final figure. Small. In a hard hat. Arm raised, facing the bridge. She looked at Seo-jun. Harabiaji, she said. The Korean word for grandfather. He should be there. It's his bridge. Seo-jun said nothing for 10 seconds. Then, yes, he should. She painted the figure. Stepped back. Assessed. Now it's finished, she said. And it was. In the hallway of an apartment in Yongsan-gu, Seoul, a 6-year-old had put the full interior life of a family on a wall, in 2 languages, 2 flags, 1 bridge, and the word that meant all of it at once. Home. The shares transferred on Seo Jun's birthday without drama. Director Lim called personally. Said only, "Your father chose correctly. In every way." Seo Jun understood every layer of meaning in the sentence. The company was safe. 9,000 people were safe. This was not the main thing that happened on Seo Jun's birthday. The main thing was breakfast. Joan made it, the proper kind, the occasion kind. Over the past year she had learned, from Seo Jun's mother who had moved from careful distance to the specific warmth of a Korean woman who has decided someone is family and expresses it entirely through food instruction, how to make the things that mattered. Her doenjang jjigae was now, in Soon-hee's assessment, acceptable, which in Soon-hee's rating system was the equivalent of excellent. Her Jiren Mari had improved beyond the version Seo Jun had learned from a video, because she had asked him to teach her properly and he had, on a Sunday afternoon, and they had made it together 6 times until she had it. She made doenjang jjigae and rice and Jiren Mari and set them on the table in the morning light. Henrietta had made a birthday card, 4 pages, organized by category, his best qualities listed with small illustrations. The illustrations were very good. One of them was the bridge. Philip had given him something from his desk. A notebook, his Korean language record for the year. Every sentence he had learned, dated, from the first halting syllables to the full conversations he now had with Mrs. Kim, who had stopped simplifying her speech for him 3 months ago on the grounds that he no longer needed it. On the last page, Philip had written 1 sentence in Korean and translated it below. "This is the home I chose." Seo Jun read this and looked at Philip. Philip looked back at him with the assessment he had been running for a year and the conclusion it had produced. "I'm still watching," Philip said. "The findings are good." "I intend to keep them that way," Seo Jun said. Philip nodded. Returned to his breakfast. Jane gave him the red block from her collection. Selected with deliberation, walked across the kitchen, placed in his hand. "Yours," she said. Then walked away. She would probably want it back by Tuesday. The gesture was no less real for that. And Joan had given him something she had spent 3 months building. She had gone back to the expat network, not as someone who needed something, but as someone who had information. She had talked to other Black Americans in Seoul, other foreign mothers, other women raising children in the space between 2 cultures. She had found the gap that nobody had filled, a practical program for multicultural families navigating Korean systems, schools, healthcare, legal questions, language, identity. A bridge between 2 worlds for the people living in the space between them. She had written the proposal with a Korean-American social worker named Dr. Yoon and 2 women from the community who knew the gap from the inside. She placed it on the table beside his birthday breakfast. He read it completely, then looked up at her. "This is what you want to build," he said. "Yes," she said. "Will you help me?" He looked at her, this woman who had walked into a consultancy office to sign a contract and had, over the course of a year, rebuilt every assumption he had made about what his life was supposed to contain. Who had learned to make doenjang jjigae from his mother's instruction and taught her children to say, with the right intonation, and navigated this city in 2 languages and 1 life. Who had raised 3 children who were each, in their entirely specific ways, the most honest people he had ever known. "Yes," he said. "Everything you need." She nodded once. Moved on, because she was not sentimental about decisions once they were made. "Good," she said. "Eat before it gets cold." He ate. This is the story of a woman who said yes in a language she didn't fully speak, not the Korean, not at first, but the language of trust. Of trying. Of walking into a room not built for her and deciding to be fully herself inside it anyway. This is the story of 3 children who had crossed an ocean and made Seoul their own, who extended their careful assessments to a Korean man in a gray sweater and found him, in a rolled omelette and a bookcase shelf and a Thursday night with a sleeping baby against his chest, worth keeping. This is the story of Baek Seo-jun, who had been given a clause by a father who understood him better than he understood himself, and who found, at a consultancy table in Gangnam, not the transaction he had engineered but the life he had stopped believing was still available to him. In an apartment in Yongsan-gu, with Namsen Tower outside the window and Mrs. Kim downstairs and soon he calling on Sundays in warmer Korean than she used to, a family moves through its days in 2 languages and 1 life. Philip reads Korean fluently now. Henrietta has plans for the next wall. Jane is 2.5 and says full sentences and remains the most accurate judge of character in the apartment, a position she holds without competition. In the hallway, 2 flags almost touch on a painted bridge. An American flag. A Korean flag. The colors of a family assembled across an ocean, standing in Seoul, having chosen to stay home. The contract expired. Nobody marked the date. What replaced it was not in any document. It lived in the barley tea made without being asked, in the step stool moved beside the bookcase, in the word a toddler used for a tower that became her word for belonging. It lived in a sentence written in a notebook by an 8-year-old. This is the home I chose. If this story found you today, if you are far from where you started, raising children in the space between 2 worlds, building something in a language that is not your first, this is for you. You are not between 2 places. You are in a 3rd one that only you could make. Subscribe. Share this with someone who is far from home and needs to be reminded that home is not always where you came from. Sometimes it is exactly where you chose to stay.